On a Thursday morning in March of 1986, a letter arrived at the Coldwater farm on Route 7 in Hardin County, Ohio. It came in a white envelope with the return address of the First Agricultural Bank of Kenton printed in the upper left corner in a particular blue ink that institutions use when they want to seem formal without seeming apologetic. The letter was addressed to Thomas Coldwater. It was 2 pages long, single-spaced, full of the legal language that banks use when they have decided something and want to surround that decision with enough words that fighting it seems impossible. Thomas read it at the kitchen table while his coffee went cold. The letter said, in its careful institutional language, that Thomas Coldwater was 91 days past due on his operating loan of $74,000, that the bank had attempted to contact him by phone on 6 separate occasions, that the collateral securing the loan, 380 acres of Hardin County farmland, had declined in appraised value to a point that the bank deemed the loan insufficiently secured, that under the terms of the loan agreement signed in 1979, the bank was exercising its right of acceleration, that Thomas had 30 days to pay the balance in full or vacate the property. Thomas was 53 years old. He had farmed that ground since 1962, when his father, Leonard Coldwater, had handed him the keys to the Farm M and gone to live with Thomas's sister in Lima, before Leonard, his grandfather, August Coldwater, had farmed it since 1921. Before August, the land had been bought by August's father, Walter, in 1903 from a family named Schaefer who had given up on Ohio farming and gone west. If you're enjoying the story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. 380 acres. 83 years of Coldwater farming. 30 days to leave. Thomas folded the letter back into its envelope and set it on the table beside his coffee. He sat there for a long time. He was not a man who panicked easily. Farming teaches you that panic is expensive and usually useless. But this was not a problem that patience could solve. He had $4,200 in the farm account. He had a corn crop still in the ground that wouldn't come out until October. He had equipment that was worth something, but not $74,000. He had no way to pay what the bank was asking in 30 days. He called his son, Gary, who was 28 and working the farm alongside him. Gary came in from the machine shed, read the letter, and said what sons say when they don't know what else to say. What are we going to do? Thomas looked out the kitchen window at the fields. March ground in Ohio, still gray and wet, the winter wheat showing its first pale green in the south field. I don't know yet, Thomas said. But before I do anything, I'm going to look at what your grandfather left in the attic. The attic of the Coldwater farmhouse was a kind of attic that accumulates the evidence of lives. Old furniture, old clothes, old tools, the particular archaeology of a family that had lived in one place for a long time and never quite gotten around to throwing anything away. Thomas had been up there twice in 20 years. Once to retrieve Christmas decorations, and once to find a part for the hay rake that he remembered seeing in a box up there in 1971. He had not gone through the trunks and boxes that sat in the northeast corner under the eaves, the ones that had been August's. August Coldwater had died in 1959. He was 71 years old, and he had spent his last years the way old farmers spend their last years, close to the land, watchful, quiet, remembering things that the younger generation hadn't yet learned to value. Thomas had been 26 when August died, old enough to know his grandfather well, young enough to still think that old men's stories were the least urgent thing in the world. He regretted that now. He pulled a chain on the attic light and started going through August's boxes. There were account ledgers going back to 1924. August's careful handwriting recording every expense and every sale, the price of corn by the bushel, the cost of seed, the wages paid to the 2 men who'd helped with the harvest in the early years. There were letters from August's brother in Pennsylvania. There were farm magazines from the 1930s and 1940s, their pages brittle and brown. And in the third box, under a wool blanket and a set of dishes wrapped in newspaper, Thomas found a wooden cigar box. The box was latched. The latch was stiff with age, but not locked. Thomas opened it. Inside, a folded document, a smaller envelope sealed with wax, and a handwritten note in August's careful German-influenced script. Thomas read the note first. Thomas, or whoever finds this, This document is for the day the bank comes. And they will come because banks always come eventually. Take it to a lawyer before you take it to the bank. Do not show it to the bank first. Show it to a lawyer. August Coldwater, September 1947. Thomas sat down on an old trunk and unfolded the document. It took him a full 10 minutes to understand what he was reading, not because it was complicated. It was actually quite simple as legal documents go, but because what it said was so unexpected that he read it 3 times to make sure he was reading it correctly, he went downstairs, picked up the phone, and called Harold Jennings, the attorney in Kenton who had handled the closing when Thomas had bought his neighbor's 40 acres in 1975. Harold, Thomas said, I need to see you today. I found something in my attic. To understand what August Coldwater did in 1947, you need to understand what 1947 felt like if you were a farmer in Hardin County who had survived the Depression. August had nearly lost a farm in 1934, not to a bank. He had carried no debt by then, having paid off his last note in 1931 with money he'd saved through the lean years of the 1920s. He'd nearly lost it to a tax sale. 2 years of crop failures and 1 catastrophic drop in corn prices had left him unable to pay the county property tax. The county had placed the farm on the delinquent tax list in the spring of 1934, and August had spent 4 months scraping together the money from every possible source. Selling cattle, selling stored grain below cost, borrowing from his brother in Pennsylvania, to pay the tax before property went to auction. He had made the payment on the last day before the auction date. He never forgot that day. For the rest of his life, August Coldwater had what his family called the bank fear. Not a fear of banks specifically, but fear of the moment when an institution with legal authority decides it wants your land. He'd seen it happen to neighbors. He'd seen good farmers lose good ground because of a clause in a document they hadn't read carefully enough, or because of a right that an institution held that the farmer hadn't known about. In the summer of 1947, August went to see a lawyer, not because he was in trouble. 1947 was a good year. Corn prices were high. The farm was paid for. August was 59 years old and had a clear title to 380 acres of some of the best ground in Hardin County. He went because of something that had happened to his neighbor, Carl Pfeiffer, the previous spring. Carl had farmed 200 acres a mile east of August since 1928. He was a good farmer, a careful man, the kind who kept his equipment maintained and his fences tight and his books in order. In the spring of 1946, Carr had refinanced his operating loan through a new bank that had opened in Kenton after the war. The terms looked good. The rate was reasonable. Carl signed the papers without reading them carefully, not because he was careless, but because he trusted the bank, and the bank's loan officer had been his son's Sunday school teacher, and in 1946 in Hardin County, that was enough trust for most men. There was a clause in Carl's loan that allowed the bank to call the balance if the property's tax assessment changed by more than 15% in any given year. Ohio had done a county-wide reassessment in the fall of 1946. Carl's land came in 21% higher than the previous assessment, a reflection of improved land values, not a reflection of anything Carl had done or failed to do. The bank called the loan. Carl paid it, but only by selling 40 acres of his best bottom ground at a price that still made him sick when he talked about it 20 years later. August had watched that happen from 1 mile away. He went to see a lawyer the following summer. He went because he wanted to know everything about that title, every right it conveyed, every protection it provided, every legal instrument that could be used to defend it against someone who might one day try to take it. The lawyer was a man named Franklin Hess, who had an office above the hardware store in Kenton. Franklin spent 3 hours with August going through the deed, the property records, and the history of the land's title going back to an original federal patent. And in that 3 hours, Franklin found something that neither August nor his father had known about. The land, all 380 acres, sat within the boundaries of a federal agricultural easement grant from 1887. The grant, recorded in the county deed book but never referenced in any subsequent transaction, established a right of first refusal in favor of the original grantor's heirs for any forced sale of the property, not a voluntary sale, not a normal transfer, but a forced sale, a foreclosure, a tax sale, a sheriff's sale, any sale conducted under legal compulsion. If the property was ever sold under compulsion, the heirs of the original grantee, in this case, the Coldwater family itself, August being the lineal heir of Walter Coldwater, who had received the easement grant, had the right to match any auction bid and take the property at that price. It was a redemption clause, buried in an 1887 easement grant, recorded in Deed Book 14, page 212 of the Hardin County Recorder's Office, never referenced in the 1903 purchase, never referenced in any tax record or assessment, never mentioned by any bank that had held a mortgage on property. Franklin has told August that in 40 years of practicing property law in Hardin County, he had never seen this clause exercised. He wasn't certain it was still enforceable. Property law had changed considerably since 1887, but it was recorded. It was in the deed book, and a recorded encumbrance, properly filed, was not easily dismissed by a bank that hadn't done its title research carefully. August paid Franklin's fee, took a certified copy of the easement grant, and went home. He put the copy in the cigar box with a note and hid it in the attic. He told no one, not Leonard, not Thomas's mother. Nobody. This document is for the day the bank comes. Harold Jennings was 61 years old and had been practicing law in Kenton for 33 years. He was not a flashy lawyer. He was a careful one, the kind that small county seats produce, a man who knew the local property records the way a farmer knows his fields, by the detailed work of years. Thomas drove to Kenton that Thursday afternoon with the cigar box on the passenger seat. Harold read August's note. He read the easement grant. He got up from his desk, went to his bookshelf, and pulled out a volume of Ohio Property Code that looked like it hadn't been opened since 1970. He read for 15 minutes without saying anything. Then he sat back down and looked at Thomas. Your grandfather was a careful man. He was. This easement is recorded in Deed Book 14 at the County Recorder's Office. I've practiced law in this county for 33 years, and I've never had occasion to look at that book. Most people don't. He tapped the document. The question is whether this clause is still enforceable under current Ohio property law. The answer is probably yes. Probably. Property law favors recorded encumbrances. If this easement was properly recorded in 1887 and has never been formally released, it remains part of the chain of title. Any title search done by the bank when they wrote your 1979 mortgage should have found it. Harold paused. Did the bank ever give you a title commitment when you signed a mortgage? Thomas thought, I got a stack of papers. I signed most of them. We need to find out if the bank's title insurance covered this easement or accepted it. If they accepted it, they knew about it. If they covered it. If their title insurance said the title was clear, they may have a problem. Thomas looked at him. What kind of problem? The kind where they can't legally foreclose without honoring the redemption right. The kind where, even if they proceed to auction, you have the right to match the winning bid and take the property back. Harold folded the easement copy carefully. Let me do some research. I need to look at Deed Book 14, and I need to see your 1979 mortgage documents. Can you bring them to me tomorrow? Thomas drove home, went to the filing cabinet in the farm office, and spent 2 hours finding every piece of paper related to the 1979 loan. He brought them to Harold the next morning. Harold spent 4 days researching. On the following Tuesday, he called Thomas into his office and told him what he'd found. The First Agricultural Bank of Kenton had engaged a title company to do the search when Thomas signed his 1979 mortgage. The title commitment they'd issued showed the property as clear of encumbrances, subject only to a few standard exceptions. Easements for utility lines, road right-of-way, and the like. Deed Book 14, page 212 was not listed as an exception. The bank's title company had either searched Deed Book 14 and missed the easement, or had not searched at all. Either way, the result was the same. The bank had issued a mortgage on property that carried a recorded encumbrance they had not disclosed to their title insurance company and had not properly evaluated before writing the loan. Harold had checked the Hardin County Recorder's Office himself. The easement was there, exactly where August's copy said it was. Properly recorded, properly indexed, not released. Here's what this means, Harold told Thomas. The bank cannot proceed to a forced sale of this property without first honoring the redemption clause in this easement. If they auction the farm, you have the right to match the highest bid. Even if you can't match it in cash, there are mechanisms, particularly the right to a financing period, that could give you time to arrange the funds. Can I stop the foreclosure entirely? Harold was careful. Not stop it. Complicate it significantly. The bank has a valid mortgage and you're behind on payments. Those are facts. But the easement creates a legal obligation they didn't account for. Before this goes any further, I want to write a letter to the bank's attorney. Not a threatening letter. A letter that simply informs them that a recorded encumbrance exists on this property that may affect their foreclosure proceeding and requests that they review their title commitment before proceeding. What does that do? It slows them down. A bank that receives that letter has to go back to their title insurance company. The title insurance company has to look at Deed Book 14. The moment they look at Deed Book 14 and see what your grandfather recorded in 1947, they have a coverage problem. And a title insurance company with a coverage problem on a foreclosure is a very motivated party to find a solution. Thomas looked at Harold for a long moment. My grandfather put this in the attic in 1947. He was 59 years old. He wrote a note that said take it to a lawyer before you take it to the bank. Your grandfather was right on both counts. Harold wrote the letter that afternoon. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. The letter arrived at the First Agricultural Bank of Kenton on a Wednesday morning, addressed to the bank's attorney, a man named Philip Oster, who ran a 3-person law firm in Ada and handled most of the agricultural foreclosures in the county. Philip read it, set it down, read it again, and picked up the phone. He called the title company that had handled the 1979 search. He described the easement. He gave the deed book and page number. The title company called back in 2 hours. The easement was confirmed. Deed Book 14, page 212. An 1887 federal agricultural easement grant with a redemption clause for 4 sales. It had not been found in the 1979 search. It had not been listed as an exception in the title commitment. It had not been disclosed to the title insurance underwriter. Philip called the bank. What happened inside the bank over the following week was not something Thomas was ever told in detail. Banks don't narrate their internal difficulties to the farmers who cause them, but the outline was reconstructible from what Philip Oster eventually said to Harold Jennings in the conversation that changed everything. The title insurance company had a problem. They had issued a policy that guaranteed clear title on a property that was not, by virtue of a recorded 1887 easement, legally clear. If the bank proceeded with the foreclosure and auctioned the property, and Thomas Coldwater exercised a redemption right and successfully challenged the sale, the title insurer could be liable for damages including the full value of the loan. The title insurer was not willing to accept that liability. The title insurer told the bank that if they proceeded with the foreclosure without resolving the easement issue, they could not guarantee coverage. A bank proceeding to foreclose on a $74,000 mortgage without title insurance coverage was a bank taking on significant legal exposure. Particularly in 1986, when the farm crisis had filled Ohio courtrooms with agricultural litigation and judges had developed a healthy skepticism of banks that had pushed farmers into loans they couldn't survive. Philip Oster called Harold Jennings on a Thursday morning, 10 days after Harold's letter had arrived. My client would like to discuss a resolution, Philip said. Harold said Thomas would be available the following Monday. The meeting was not at the bank. Harold had suggested the bank's conference room. Thomas had said no. If they were going to discuss his farm, they were going to discuss it at his farm, at his kitchen table, the same table where August had probably sat when he came home from Franklin Hess's office in 1947 with the cigar box and the plan. Philip Oster drove out on a Monday morning in April. He came alone. The bank's president had decided not to attend, which Harold read as a signal that the bank wanted flexibility to settle without committing anyone with authority to a public position. Philip was 44, careful, professionally neutral in the way that lawyers are neutral when they're delivering news they didn't create and can't be blamed for. He sat at Thomas's kitchen table and laid out what the bank was prepared to offer. The bank would withdraw the acceleration notice. The 30-day eviction demand was off the table. The bank would restructure the loan at a fixed rate, dropping from a variable rate that had climbed to 16% back down to 9%, the original rate of the 1979 mortgage. The principal would be reduced by the amount of 3 missed payments, acknowledging that the circumstances of the farm crisis constituted an extraordinary event that justified some accommodation. Thomas would remain on the farm. He would make reduced payments for 3 years. After 3 years, the terms would be reviewed. What happens to the easement? Harold asked. The bank's title company will record a formal acknowledgement of the easement in the deed book. They'll also record a subordination agreement confirming that the bank's mortgage is subject to the redemption rights established in the 1887 grant, meaning if there's ever a future for sale, Thomas has a right to match the bid. It's formally part of the chain of title now. Both the bank and the title company are acknowledging it. Thomas looked at Harold. Harold nodded slightly. Thomas looked at Philip Oster. My grandfather put that easement in a box in 1947. He told whoever found it to take it to a lawyer before taking it to the bank. Philip said nothing. He was protecting this farm for a day he knew would come. He just didn't know when. Mr. Coldwater, Philip said, choosing his words carefully. The easement was recorded in 1887. Your grandfather found it in 1947. You found it in 1986. At every stage, it was a matter of public record. Anyone could have found it with a thorough title search. But nobody did. Nobody did. Thomas signed a restructuring agreement. He signed it at his kitchen table, in the house his grandfather had built, on land that had been his family for 83 years and would now remain so. There's a way of thinking about land that is not taught in any agricultural economics course and does not appear in any extension bulletin. It is the way August Coldwater thought about it. August did not think of his 380 acres as a financial asset. He did not think about it in terms of its appraised value or its collateral value or what it could secure on a loan. He thought about it as something that existed in time, that had been there before him and would be there after him, and that his job was to pass it forward in better condition than he had received it. This way of thinking made him careful in ways that his neighbors were not always careful. It made him pay off his notes as fast as possible. It made him save money in good years against the bad years he knew were coming. It made him go to a lawyer in 1947, in a good year when there was no immediate threat, and ask the most important question a man who owns land can ask. What could someone use to take this from my family, and what can I do about it now? Franklin Hess had found the answer in Deed Book 14. August had recorded it in a cigar box and put it in the attic with a note he had not told Leonard. This puzzled Thomas when he first thought about it. Why hadn't August told his son? Gary answered that question one evening when he and Thomas were sitting on the porch after a long day. He didn't tell Grandpa Leonard because if he had told him, Leonard would have thought about it as a problem to solve right then, something to act on. And there was nothing to act on in 1947. The only thing to do was wait. And you can't tell a man in his 30s to wait 39 years for a problem that might never come. Thomas thought about that. So he put it where someone would find it when they needed it. And he told whoever found it what to do with it. August had understood something about time that younger men rarely understand. He had understood that the protection he put in place in 1947 might not be needed for 30 years or 40 or at all. But it cost him almost nothing to create it. An afternoon with a lawyer, a cigar box, a note, and the cost of not having it. If the day ever came, was everything. The day came in 1986. August had been dead for 27 years. He won anyway. Thomas farmed under the restructured loan for 3 years. In 1989, when the review came, corn prices had recovered enough and his debt-to-equity ratio had improved enough that the bank offered conventional terms. Thomas accepted them. He paid off the final balance in 1994 at the age of 61. He burned the payment receipt at the kitchen table, the way August had burned documents. Not the receipt itself, which he kept, but a copy of it, in the kitchen sink, watching the paper curl and blacken. Your great-grandfather did this, he told Gary. When he paid off the last note on this farm, he burned the mortgage in the wood stove. Gary watched the paper burn. Why? Because some things need a ceremony. You pay a debt that almost took everything. You don't just file the paper. You mark the moment. Gary took over the farm in 1998. Thomas was 65 and his knees had submitted their resignations the previous autumn. Gary ran the operation the way Thomas had taught him, and Thomas had been taught by Leonard, and Leonard had learned from August. Carefully, without excess debt, with attention to the ground and the records and the things that could be used against you if you weren't watching. Gary did one thing that none of the previous generations had done. In 2001, he had a complete title search done on the property. Not for a mortgage, just for his own knowledge. He hired a title company from Finley who specialized in agricultural property, told him to go back to the original federal patent, and paid him to look at every deed book the property appeared in. They found 3 encumbrances that had never been formally addressed. 2 were minor, old utility easements that had long since been abandoned. The third was more interesting. A drainage agreement from 1916 that gave August's neighbor to the east the right to tile through the Coldwater property for a specific drainage run. The neighbor's land had changed hands twice since 1916. Neither buyer had known about the agreement. Neither had Gary's family. Gary had the agreement formally recorded and clarified. The current neighbor, a man named Dale Eckert, was surprised the alert existed and then relieved because he had been considering a drainage project on his east field and now knew he had a legal right to route it through the Coldwater tile line. Your family put this agreement in place in 1916, Gary told Dale. My family never mentioned it to you. Your family never mentioned it to mine. It's been sitting in the deed book for 85 years. Dale Eckert shook his head. I bought this farm in 1989. I had a title search done. Nobody found it. August had a title search done in 1947. Franklin has found the 1887 easement that saved his farm in 1986. Dale looked at him. Franklin has found something in 1947 that saved your farm in 1986? 39 years later, my grandfather put it in a cigar box in the attic. There was a pause. I'm going to have my deed book searched, Dale said. That's what I do. The cigar box is on a shelf in the farm office in the Coldwater farmhouse. August's note is still inside it, folded, slightly brittle at the creases. The original certified copy of the 1887 easement is there, along with the copy Harold Jennings used in 1986, annotated in Harold handwriting. The sealed envelope with the wax seal is there too. Gary opened it after Thomas gave him the box and found a second note inside in August's handwriting. The deed is the land. The land is the family. The family is the deed. Keep these together. Gary has added to the box. The 1986 restructuring agreement is in there, along with the 1994 payoff receipt. His own title search from 2001 is in there, with the 3 encumbrances highlighted. His attorney's notes from the drainage agreement resolution are in there. His daughter, Megan, is 24 years old. She studied agricultural business at Ohio State and came back to the farm a year after she graduated. When Gary gave her the box and explained what was in it and what it had done, she sat at the kitchen table and read every document, all of them. Then she looked at her father. He did this in 1947. September of 1947. He was 59 years old. Good year, no trouble, no threat. He went to a lawyer and asked what could be used to take the farm and what he could do about it. Megan looked at the note. This document is for the day the bank comes. And they will come because banks always come eventually. He knew they'd come. He'd seen enough to know. And he was dead for 27 years before his plan worked. 27 years. But it worked. Megan was quiet for a moment. What do I do with it now? Gary looked at the box, at August's handwriting on the note, at the 1887 easement that a government surveyor had written out in careful copperplate and an Ohio lawyer had found in a deed book in 1947, and a cigar box had been protected for 39 years. You do what August did. You take it to a lawyer. You ask what you don't know about your title. You add what you find to the box. And you make sure whoever comes after you knows where to find it. Megan nodded. She took the box to a property attorney in Finley 2 weeks later. The attorney found one thing August and Franklin and Harold and Gary had all missed: a minor covenant from 1934 restricting the use of the northwest 40 acres for commercial purposes. Not relevant to current operations, but worth knowing, worth having on record. She added the attorney's report to the box. The land is still in the family. The box is still in the office. August has been dead for 65 years. He is still protecting the farm. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.